The knock came just as Ethan Miller was about to turn off the lights. It was late for visitors. The city outside his Toronto apartment hummed with traffic and cold wind, but inside, everything was quiet. Ethan stood still, listening. The knock came again, firm, careful, like someone afraid of being turned away. He opened the door. Both of his aunts stood there. Aunt Claire was tall and composed, her gray coat buttoned all the way up, her dark hair pulled back like always. Aunt Margaret stood beside her, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes tired but alert. They were sisters, but very different. And they had not shown up together in years. Ethan's first thought was that something bad had happened. "Is everything okay?" he asked. Claire smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "May we come in?" He stepped aside. The cold followed them in, along with a feeling Ethan couldn't name. They took off their coats slowly, as if neither of them was sure they should be there. The apartment was small but neat. A couch, a coffee table, shelves lined with books Ethan hadn't finished reading. Margaret glanced around like she was seeing him for the first time as an adult. "You've done well for yourself," she said. Ethan nodded, unsure what to say. "Tea?" "Yes," Claire said quickly. "That would be nice." They sat at the kitchen table while Ethan boiled water. He noticed how quiet they were. No usual jokes. No easy comments about his job or the weather. Something was wrong. Or something important. When he brought the tea, Margaret wrapped her hands around the cup but didn't drink. Claire stared at the steam rising, her face calm but tense. Claire spoke first. "We didn't plan to come together," she said. "It just happened this way." Margaret let out a slow breath. "We weren't sure you'd open the door." Ethan frowned. "Why wouldn't I?" They exchanged a look. Years of shared memory passed between them in silence. "Because," Margaret said softly, "what we're about to say might change how you see us." Ethan felt a tight pull in his chest. He sat down. Claire folded her hands. "You're the only one we could come to." That sentence landed heavier than anything else. Ethan had always been close to them, especially after his parents died when he was young. Claire had helped with school, schedules, advice. Margaret had filled holidays with warmth, music, and food. They were steady parts of his life. But now, they looked unsure. Almost afraid. Margaret spoke again. "You know we've always tried to be strong. For the family. For you." Ethan nodded. "And sometimes," she continued, "strength means staying silent." The room felt smaller. Claire stood and walked to the window. Outside, streetlights reflected on wet pavement. She spoke without turning around. "There are things we never said. Choices we made. Lives we didn't live." Ethan watched her back. He remembered being 10 years old, sitting at Claire's kitchen table, watching her check her watch over and over, like she was waiting for someone who never came. Margaret cleared her throat. "We're not here to ask for forgiveness." That word, forgiveness, sent a quiet alarm through him. "We're here," Margaret said, "because time is no longer something we can ignore." Ethan leaned forward. "Please. Just tell me." Claire turned back to the table. Her face was serious now. "Before we do, you need to promise something." Ethan hesitated. "What kind of promise?" "That you won't judge us too quickly," she said. "And that you'll listen until the end." He looked from one to the other. Two women who had never asked him for anything big. Not like this. "I promise," he said. Margaret closed her eyes for a second, then opened them. "Do you remember Uncle Daniel?" Ethan blinked. "The name sounds familiar." "He was never really your uncle," Margaret said. "He was someone I loved. A long time ago." Claire added quietly, "and someone I once pushed away." Ethan's heart skipped. Margaret continued, her voice steady but thin. "I haven't spoken his name out loud in over 30 years. The kettle clicked as it cooled. No one moved. There are parts of our lives, Claire said, that stayed unfinished. Not because we didn't care, but because we were afraid. Ethan felt caught between confusion and something deeper. He sensed that what they were circling around was not just about the past, but about choices that still hurt. Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. She placed it on the table but didn't push it toward him. "This arrived last week," she said. Ethan stared at it. His name wasn't on it. Someone else's handwriting covered the front. "I haven't opened it yet," Margaret added. Claire's voice was low. "And I asked her not to. Until we talked to you." Ethan looked up sharply. "Why me?" "Because," Claire said, meeting his eyes, "you understand regret." That hit closer than Ethan expected. He thought of nights he spent alone, replaying conversations he wished he'd finished differently. Of the woman he loved but let go because he thought he had time. Margaret slid the envelope an inch closer to him. "We didn't come here to ask you to solve anything," she said. "We came because we don't know how to begin." Ethan's pulse quickened. He hadn't touched the envelope, but it already felt like a weight between them. Outside, another gust of wind rattled the window. Claire spoke one last time. "What we're about to ask of you, it won't be easy." Ethan's hand hovered over the table. Ethan sat across from his aunts, the envelope on the table between them like a silent challenge. The apartment felt smaller now, as if the walls themselves were listening. He could hear the hum of the city outside, the faint squeak of a radiator, but inside, nothing moved except the tension gathering in the air. Claire cleared her throat. "We didn't come here just to reminisce," she said. Her eyes held a mix of fear and hope. "We came because we need your help." Ethan frowned, unsure what kind of help they could need from him. He had always been the one leaning on them, not the other way around. "What kind of help?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her tea. She took a sip and then set it down with care, like handling something fragile. "It's personal," she said. "Something we never finished, something we left behind, and we can't do it alone." Ethan leaned forward. "I don't understand. You're telling me you need me, to what? Fix things?" Claire shook her head. "No. We don't expect you to fix anything. We just need someone to be there. To guide us, support us, help us face things we've avoided for decades." Ethan's mind raced. He thought of the envelope, of the weight it carried, of the long years he had spent avoiding his own regrets. And suddenly he realized they weren't asking for practical help. They were asking for emotional courage, for someone to walk beside them into the parts of life they had ignored. Margaret finally spoke again. 30 years ago, I left someone I loved, someone who loved me back. We were young, foolish, and scared. I walked away. And now, he's reached out." Ethan felt a sudden jolt. He had never heard Margaret speak like this before, her voice so soft yet so full of pain. "Why now?" he asked. "He's ill," Margaret admitted. "Not dying, not yet, but he's fragile. He wants to see me, to talk, maybe to forgive, maybe to be forgiven. I don't know if I can." Claire's gaze shifted to Ethan. "And I walked away from love too, though for a different reason. I stayed back to take care of family, to keep things steady. But now, I'm tired of being brave alone. I want to try, even if it's late." Ethan felt his chest tighten. Two women he loved like family, yet two women he had never truly seen like this, standing at the edge of their own stories, looking to him to help them step forward. He didn't know where to start. "So, you want me to help you face them?" he asked slowly. "Yes," Claire said. "Not by telling you what to do, but by being there, listening, helping us navigate it. We can't do it alone, Ethan. And somehow, we both thought you might understand what it means to regret, what it means to long for something that slipped away." Ethan swallowed hard. He thought of his own life, the choices he had made, the woman he had let go, the mistakes he had tucked away in corners of his heart. Suddenly, the aunt's request didn't feel strange. It felt like a mirror of his own life. Margaret handed him the envelope. "This is the first step. You don't have to open it yet. Just hold it. Understand what it represents." Ethan looked at it, felt its weight, and understood it wasn't just paper, it was the embodiment of years of silence, of longing, of unfinished love. He nodded slowly. They spent the next hour talking, carefully unfolding memories. Margaret spoke of the young man she loved, of stolen glances, letters never sent, promises broken by fear. Claire spoke of the love she had put aside, of sacrifices made for family, of the nights she cried herself to sleep quietly, pretending to be strong. Ethan listened, truly listened. He realized that both women carried hearts full of longing, hearts heavy with the weight of what could have been. And yet, there was something else too, hope. A fragile, trembling hope that maybe it wasn't too late. Claire leaned back, her eyes distant. "We're not asking you to choose for us. We're asking you to help us be brave enough to choose for ourselves." Ethan's hands tightened around the envelope. He thought of the roads they would have to travel, the conversations they would have to have, the truths they would need to face. It would not be easy, but he knew he couldn't turn away. Not from them, not from the stories they had carried for decades. Margaret reached out and touched his hand briefly. "We trust you," she said simply. "We've always trusted you." The weight of that trust pressed down on him, heavier than anything he had carried before. It wasn't just about helping them. It was about being the kind of person who could face fear, who could guide hearts toward healing, who could listen without judgment, who could hold space for the pain of those he loved. Ethan nodded, feeling a strange mixture of fear and determination. "I'll help," he said. "I'll be there." Both women exhaled, relief softening their faces for the first time since they had arrived. For a moment, the apartment felt warmer, the tension lifting just slightly, replaced by the fragile hope that perhaps, with him, they could confront the past and maybe, just maybe, find some peace. Then Claire spoke, quietly but firmly, "The first step will be difficult. Margaret received another letter recently. You'll need to help her decide what to do. It's not just about courage, it's about facing consequences we've ignored for years." Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. The request wasn't over yet, the journey was just beginning. He glanced at Margaret, whose hands were now trembling not from cold but from the anticipation of what lay ahead. He glanced at Claire, whose face was set in quiet determination. And he realized that helping them wouldn't just change their lives, it might change his own as well. The envelope lay between them, a small object, yet heavy with history, emotions, and possibilities. Ethan's mind spun with questions, worries, and the flicker of excitement he hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long while, he felt alive with purpose, drawn into a story bigger than himself, a story that demanded courage, honesty, and the willingness to love despite fear. He took a deep breath. "We start tomorrow," he said. Margaret nodded. Claire smiled faintly. And in that moment, the three of them, two women carrying decades of longing and a young man carrying his own regrets, formed an unspoken pact. They would face the past together, step by step, and maybe, just maybe, they could find a path toward forgiveness, love, and new beginnings. Ethan didn't know what awaited them, but he knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The journey had begun, and there was no turning back, and in that moment, before a single word of the request was spoken, he knew his life was about to turn in a direction he never planned for. Ethan woke early the next morning with a mixture of excitement and nerves. He had spent the night thinking about the aunt's request, about the letters, and about the weight of the past they were about to face. The city was quiet outside his Toronto apartment, the sky pale with dawn, and for the first time in weeks, he felt the strange thrill of being part of something bigger than himself. Margaret was waiting when he arrived at her house. Her small living room smelled faintly of coffee and old books. She greeted him with a soft smile, but her hands trembled slightly as she handed him the envelope. "It's time," she said. Ethan took it carefully. He could feel the years of silence, of unspoken words, pressing against the paper. Margaret's eyes were filled with nervous hope, and he understood immediately that the letter wasn't just ink and paper, it was a doorway into her heart. "Are you ready?" he asked gently. Margaret nodded. "I think so. But I'm scared." Ethan squeezed her hand. "I'll be right here. You're not alone." They drove through the city streets, the car quiet except for the hum of tires on asphalt. Margaret talked softly about her memories, about how she had met the man she loved, how young and reckless they had been, how life had pulled them apart. Ethan listened closely, asking questions only when needed, letting her words guide the conversation. When they reached the small cafe where she had agreed to meet him, Margaret's breath hitched. The man was already there, sitting at a corner table, older now, his hair streaked with gray. But the eyes, the same warm, familiar eyes, made Margaret's heart leap and ache at the same time. Ethan stayed near the door, letting her approach. Margaret hesitated, then stepped forward, her hand shaking slightly. When they finally spoke, Ethan watched from a distance. The conversation was quiet, measured, full of pauses that seemed to stretch forever. He saw tears in her eyes and in his own. Margaret laughed softly at something he said, and it was a sound Ethan had never heard before, light, free, alive. Hours later, they returned to her house. Margaret sat quietly, a smile on her face, exhausted but relieved. "It's over," she said. "It wasn't perfect, but it's honest. I feel lighter." Ethan nodded. He could see it, the way her shoulders had relaxed, the way her eyes glimmered with something new. Helping her face the past had changed her. And somehow, it had changed him too. The next day, he visited Claire. They went to a quiet park, where autumn leaves fell like confetti, swirling in the breeze. Claire had never been one to speak freely about her past, but today, she was different. She told him about the love she had put aside, the nights she had cried herself to sleep, the sacrifices she had made for family. Ethan listened, absorbing every word. Her story was quieter, more subtle than Margaret's, but no less painful. As she spoke, he realized how much strength it had taken for her to hold herself together all those years. And as he listened, he felt a stir of something unexpected, a connection, not romantic at first, but deep and tender, the kind of bond that comes from truly knowing someone's heart. They walked along the park paths, talking about choices and regrets. Claire paused by a bench, looking at him with an intensity Ethan hadn't seen before. "You understand regret, don't you?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then nodded. "I do. More than I like to admit." For a long moment, they were silent, the air between them filled with unspoken thoughts. Ethan thought of Lena, the woman he had let go the previous year. He thought of missed chances and the fear that had held him back. And as he looked at Claire, he realized something important: helping them face their past had forced him to confront his own. Days passed, and Ethan found himself moving between the two women, listening, supporting, guiding. Margaret continued to meet her past, writing letters, talking on the phone, reconnecting. Claire, meanwhile, began to take small steps toward a future she had once thought impossible, attending gatherings she had avoided, letting herself smile more freely, letting Ethan see her vulnerabilities. Through it all, Ethan felt his own heart opening in ways he hadn't expected. He found himself thinking about love differently, about courage, about the choices he had made and the ones he still could make. Watching his aunts embrace the past, accept pain, and take risks made him see that love wasn't just about passion or romance, it was about honesty, bravery, and the willingness to show up, even when it scared you. One evening, after a long day helping Margaret sort through old letters, Ethan sat with Claire on a park bench. The sky was painted with shades of pink and orange. She looked at him quietly. "You've changed," she said softly. Ethan smiled faintly. "So have you." She reached out and touched his hand. The gesture was brief, tender, and full of meaning. In that moment, Ethan felt a rush of emotion, gratitude, longing, and something deeper, something that had been asleep in his heart for too long. "Do you ever regret?" Claire asked quietly, her eyes searching his. He thought of Lena, of missed chances, of fear and hesitation. Yes, he admitted. But seeing you and Margaret now. I think regret is a teacher, not a prison. It shows us what matters. Claire nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. Then maybe it's not too late. Ethan felt the weight of those words settle in his chest. Margaret had faced her past. Claire was stepping toward hers. And now, he realized, it was his turn. Helping them had forced him to confront the truth of his own life, the love he had let slip away, the courage he had hidden behind excuses. The following week, another letter arrived for Margaret. This one was urgent, with news that demanded action. She turned to Ethan, fear and hope mingling in her eyes. He knew what she needed, he would be there, as promised. And in the quiet moments between guiding her and Claire, Ethan began to understand that life was about these fragile, tender connections, about showing up, about love in all its forms. As he sat with Claire in a quiet cafe later that afternoon, he realized how much he had grown. The woman beside him was strong, beautiful in a quiet, unassuming way, and he felt a pull he hadn't expected. It was complicated, yes, and filled with layers of emotion, but it was real. Claire looked at him, her voice soft. You've done more than I expected, Ethan. You've helped us see what we've been afraid to face. He smiled, feeling the warmth of her words. And you've helped me see myself. The weeks that followed were a blur of letters, meetings, and long conversations. Margaret faced her past with courage, and Claire began to embrace a future she had once thought closed. And Ethan? He began to realize that love, courage, and healing weren't just for others, they were for him too. By the end of that month, Ethan felt something he hadn't in years, a sense of purpose, of connection, of hope. He had helped 2 women confront the past, and in doing so, he had confronted his own heart. He understood, finally, that love wasn't about perfection or timing, it was about showing up, being present, and taking the risks that matter most. And in that quiet understanding, Ethan realized the journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. For Margaret, for Claire, and for himself, the future was waiting, fragile and full of possibility, and he was ready to step into it. Ethan woke that morning with a restless energy he hadn't felt in years. The past weeks had been full of quiet revelations, tender confessions, and long drives with Margaret, walks with Claire, and late-night conversations that left him exhausted but strangely alive. Now, the final step of their journey was ahead. Margaret had received another letter, one that demanded a decision. The man from her past wanted to meet her immediately. The urgency in his words was clear. Ethan arrived at her apartment, the envelope clutched tightly in his hand. Margaret was already dressed, sitting by the window, staring at the city below. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. Margaret didn't answer right away. She shook her head slightly, then took a deep breath. "I think I am. But I'm scared. What if it's too much?" Ethan sat beside her. "Then we face it together," he said. "No running, no pretending. Just honesty." She nodded, and for the first time in decades, she looked like someone ready to take a step forward. They drove in silence through Toronto streets bathed in morning light, the air crisp and clean. Ethan kept his hand on hers, a quiet reassurance. He could feel her pulse, nervous but steady. When they arrived at the cafe, the man was already there. He stood as Margaret approached, older, gray at the temples, but still the same warmth in his eyes. Margaret paused for a moment, then stepped forward. Ethan stayed nearby, ready if she faltered. The conversation that followed was long, measured, full of pauses and hesitant smiles. Margaret spoke honestly, recounting the years apart, the mistakes, the regrets. The man listened, nodding, and sometimes speaking softly, his words careful. Ethan watched, feeling the tension release from Margaret in waves. She laughed softly at a shared memory, wiped away a tear, and for the first time in decades, looked lighter. Hours later, they returned home. Margaret sat quietly, exhausted but relieved. "It's done," she said. "It wasn't perfect, but it's honest. I feel free." Ethan smiled, seeing the relief on her face. Helping her face the past had changed her, but it had changed him too. He understood now that love wasn't only about passion or timing, it was about courage, honesty, and showing up, even when fear threatened to hold you back. The next day, he met Claire at a quiet park filled with autumn leaves drifting in the wind. She had been taking small steps toward her own future, reconnecting with friends, and letting herself experience joy she had long denied. "I've thought about it," Claire said as they walked. "I've spent so long being strong alone, keeping everything in its place. But now I see I don't have to do it alone. Not anymore." Ethan listened carefully. He felt the depth of her words, the longing behind them. "You've been brave for so long," he said. "Now it's okay to let someone in." Claire smiled faintly, her eyes searching his. There was a moment of quiet intensity, a recognition of unspoken understanding. Ethan felt a stir of emotion he hadn't expected. It was tender, cautious, but real, a connection born from shared vulnerability and mutual respect. Over the next few days, Ethan continued to help Claire navigate her feelings. They spent long afternoons talking, walking through familiar streets, sharing memories, and imagining possibilities. She opened up about love she had once denied herself, fears she had carried quietly, and hopes she hadn't dared to speak aloud. Ethan listened, guided gently, and in the process, began to see the ways his own heart had been closed off, waiting for permission to heal. Margaret, meanwhile, continued to meet her past, writing letters, returning calls, and finding closure in ways she had long postponed. Ethan was there for her too, a steady presence, giving support without judgment. Through both women, he saw courage, resilience, and the willingness to take emotional risks, and he realized that these were qualities he needed to embrace in his own life. One evening, after a long day with Margaret, Ethan sat quietly with Claire in a cafe. The sun was setting, painting the room in soft pink and gold. Claire reached across the table and touched his hand lightly. "You've changed," she said softly. Ethan smiled, feeling warmth spread through him. "So have you," he replied. She looked at him, her eyes steady. "You've helped us face what we were afraid of. But you've also faced your own fears along the way, haven't you?" Ethan nodded. "Yes. I've realized I've been hiding from my own heart for too long. Seeing you and Margaret embrace the past, it's made me see what really matters." Claire's hand stayed on his, a quiet gesture full of meaning.